Hello, AP Psych. Today we're going to be talking about research methods. So this is all, again, review from the Memorize and the Crash Course assignment you had over the summer. But I do want to refresh it because this is stuff that is important for you to understand moving forward for every single psychology unit. Because psychology is a science, we have to understand how research methods are applied, the implications of them, and what that all means for the discipline of psychology. So here we go. So first of all, let's talk about independent versus dependent variables. So an independent variable is the thing in the experiment that the experimenter is able to manipulate, the thing that is changed. So, and in the example on this slide, if you were going to study the effects of amount of water on a plant growth, the independent variable would be the amount of water you give the plant. The dependent variable is the thing that is affected by the change in the independent variable. So in this case, the dependent variable is the size of the plant, or you can go with the number of leaves, living or dead, whatever it is that you are looking to determine with this experiment. Also in experiments, typically there are two separate groups, an experimental group and the control group. The experimental group receives some kind of treatment, and the control group does not. I'm going to include a more in-depth video about experimental versus control groups now. So there are a few components of experiments that must exist in order for it to be considered a scientific experiment. And you've probably mentioned these in your science classes. So first, a hypothesis, or you might have heard this defined as an educated guess. It is a tentative statement about the relationship between two or more variables. Tentative meaning this could possibly be changed. An operational definition describes the actions or operations that will be used to measure or control a variable. And this is incredibly important for replication so that other scientists or researchers know exactly what to do when conducting this experiment. So now let's practice. Let's give you guys this hypothetical situation, this hypothetical experiment. So let's say I was going to conduct an experiment to see if giving my AP Psych students caffeine increases their attentiveness in class. To test my hypothesis, I give one half of the class regular coffee and the other half gets decaf coffee. So right now I want you to identify the hypothesis, the independent variable, the dependent variable, the experimental group, and the control group. How did you do? So the hypothesis would be that caffeine makes students more attentive. The independent variable is the caffeine in the coffee. The dependent variable is student attentiveness. The experimental group is the group of students receiving regular coffee, and the control group is the group of students receiving decaf coffee. Let's talk about random sampling versus random assignment. They are two separate things, and they are both important for validity of an experiment. So a random sample is occurs when you are initially choosing your participants, and this happens before assignment is taking place. So you're just getting your participants, your research subjects all together. Random assignment occurs once you have those research subjects chosen, and you have to randomly assign them to the experimental group or the control group. Now, Why would you want that to be random? Using a process of random sampling and random assignment helps the researcher to ensure that they get the most accurate results possible. Now, in Myers chapter 1, the portion you've read to this point, it talks about 3 different types of studies, but there are a few more that I wanted to bring your attention to. You've already read about naturalistic observation, when a researcher engages in careful observation of subjects in their natural environment. Ideally, in naturalistic observation, subjects wouldn't be aware that the researcher is conducting observations because their behavior might change if they know they're being watched. You ever had a teacher who was being observed and they act completely differently? Yeah. Controlled observation is when behavior is observed in a laboratory setting. And a case study is an in-depth investigation of an individual subject. That one was covered in your Myers reading as well. A lab experiment is a study conducted in a well-controlled environment where a researcher has total control over independent variables. A field experiment is conducted in the natural environment of participants, but situations are artificially set up and the researcher manipulates variables. And a survey is when researchers use questionnaires or interviews to gather information about participants' backgrounds, thoughts, feelings, behavior, etc. So there are 3 very important considerations for psychological research or research in any scientific discipline. The first is that an experiment must be able to be replicated. And this is what we demonstrated with your Lego activity. So there needs to be clear directions and clear operational definitions in an experiment so that other researchers can do the experiment again to see if they yield the same results. And why would that be important? Did you say that it's because they might get different or similar results? If you did, you were right. Number 2 is experimenter bias. And this is when an experimenter's expectations influence the results obtained. So they might choose to analyze the data in a kind of skewed way or cherry pick data, and that is not ethical. And then the null hypothesis, and this is the assumption that there is no true relationship between the variables being observed. You'll also read about single blind versus double blind procedures. In a single blind procedure, only the subjects don't know which group they're in, the experimental or control group, but the researcher does. In a double blind procedure, neither the researcher nor the participants know what groups, like who is in what group. All of that is done through maybe assistance or a computer program, and that helps to counter the effects of experimenter bias. And now for the part where math meets social studies. Statistics. So descriptive statistics just describe sets of data. And some types of descriptive statistics are measures of central tendency, which you've probably heard about in your math classes or your science classes already. The mean just refers to the average. Median is the middle value. And the mode is the most common value. On the right here, you see a bell curve that represents normal distribution. And in a normal distribution, the median, mode, and mean are all the same. So it's a perfect bell curve. But your data may be skewed. So a positively skewed distribution is one where most of the data is over here. A negatively skewed distribution is one where most of the data is over here. So if a group has one high score, the curve has a positive skew, meaning it contains more low scores. And if a group has a low outlier, the curve has a negative skew because it contains more high scores. So other measures of variability include range, which is just the distance from the highest to the lowest scores. Standard deviation is a measure of the variance of scores around the mean. So the higher the standard deviation is, the more varied the scores are. The lower the standard deviation is means that the more towards the middle they are. And I'm including a video right here on standard deviation because this one always tripped me up. Finally, a z-score. We're not going to be talking about this too much in psych, but you may see it from time to time. Z-score is another measurement that, another unit rather, that measures the distance of one score to the mean. So if there is a positive z-score, that means that it is above the mean. And if there's a negative z-score, it means it's below the mean. So that's it for our lecture today on research methods and statistics. As always, please reach out to me if you have any questions, concerns, or you just want to go over some things to make sure you've got it. Have a wonderful rest of your day, Psych.